Coronavirus has changed our world dramatically. Now, whether it's for the short term or the long term remains to be seen. But here is one way that we have definitely changed as a nation, and that is a lot of us, parents, children, teenagers, educators alike, a lot of the world has now had a taste, a small taste of what homeschooling is like. So we have to ask ourselves, how are we all feeling about homeschooling about now? Is homeschooling hurting our children? According to a Harvard professor, actually, homeschooling as an education method is very detrimental for a variety of reasons and should be banned. Today, we're going to explore homeschooling, the pros, the cons, and the realities of both homeschooling and our public education system. This is Deconstructing the Culture, and I am your host, Elisa Steele. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Deconstructing the Culture. This week's 30-second bump update for my pregnancy, 24 weeks tomorrow. And yes, I'm going to answer once and for all. I'm getting a lot of messages and comments. Elisa, you're looking very small. Why is your bump so small? Yes, I know my baby bump is very small. That is due to a variety of factors, from the fact that I have a long torso to the fact that this is my first pregnancy to reach this far. And genetics, women in my family, according to my mom, just don't get super big, I guess. They tend to carry more inwardly. So for everyone asking, yes, I'm 24 weeks and baby is perfectly healthy. My midwife can attest to that. So yes, that is our bump update. I know that I am small. I guess one of the pros of being on the smaller side is I just look like I ate a really big meal. So I'm not really getting a whole lot of unwelcome belly touches. Probably will have only a short period where that's even a reality, because I probably won't be super large until later, at least for this pregnancy. All right, also, quick ask for my audience. Since you guys are all rebel rouser freedom fighters, I am debating getting chickens, but where I live has a very strict HOA. So if any of y'all have experience finding your HOA to keep chickens, I've even thought so far as to maybe getting my chickens, I only want a few, maybe 2 to 4 chickens, and trying to see if I could get them registered as a therapy chicken or an emotional support chicken or something, so that I can keep them, because I'm just if people can keep, which my feelings about keeping pets in the house, these are going to be outside chickens, of course, but the way I see it, if you know how I feel about pets in the house, I think it's absolutely disgusting to have cats and dogs in the house, which are the most common pets. I think it's gross to have any pets in the house, but specifically cats and dogs. I think it's absolutely disgusting, nasty, don't ever want to do it. So the way I see it, and forgive me if I've offended you, I don't really care. If people can get away with having noisy dogs that yip at me when I walk past their house, then why can't I get away with having 2 or 3 chickens that make a little bit of squawking when they're laying their eggs? That's my rationale. Tell me if you've been through this HOA fight before. Please message me or email me if you have any tips or tricks on how to get around a strict HOA to keep chickens in your backyard. Okay. Also, I did tell you I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on COVID, and I'm going to stay true to that. I am not going to talk about coronavirus, but I do want to point out that it's recently been discovered, and I'm laughing only because I think this is ridiculous, but it's been recently discovered that apparently, according to the scientists, no, vitamin D can help fight COVID-19. Well, duh, because vitamin D, having an adequate amount in your body, will help you fight anything. It is an immune support booster. So that's why I think it's one of the most ridiculous parts of the quarantine shutdown is closing all of our public parks, and for me here in Florida, public beaches, which is ridiculous because people naturally social distance on beaches. When do you ever go to a beach and be like, ooh, I want to be 6 feet or closer to you, honey, while we sunbathe? No, everyone wants to be far away from people when you go to the beach. You try and go to the least populated area. We naturally socially distance at a beach anyways. Why would you close them? Stop people's access to adequate amounts of vitamin D and fresh air and sunshine. Anyway, so I just want to point that out. I think it's funny in an ironic, sad way. But let's talk about today's topic. Today, we're going to talk about homeschooling. Now, I'm going to be straightforward on this. Of course, I am biased towards homeschooling. Out front, not going to hide that from you. I am biased towards homeschooling for a couple of reasons. A, I was homeschooled, I would say 100% of my life. I'll tell you why I say it that way. And my husband was homeschooled for all of his life except maybe a couple of months. I think he was maybe in kindergarten or first grade, and he was in school for maybe 2 or 3 months. Okay. So basically, he was homeschooled his whole life too. Same with his younger brother, same with my younger five siblings, or excuse me, younger four siblings. I'm the oldest of five. So I personally have had a really phenomenal experience with homeschooling. My husband and his family has had a very phenomenal experience with homeschooling, and so have a lot of my very, very close friends. I grew up in a homeschool community in Utah that was very wide, very rich, had a lot of support, and I had a very diversified education. So for me personally, I look at what's going on today with COVID-19 and all these people saying that they're homeschooling, they're giving homeschooling a try. And I kind of chuckle. And I don't mean this to be offensive. I know there are many of you who are going to be listening today being like, Elisa, why are you disparaging the work that I'm putting into this? Like, yeah, my kids are all stuck at home for the first time. I feel like I'm homeschooling. I'm going to tell you right now, honestly, I don't think you're actually homeschooling. If your kid has been in public school or even full-time private school this whole time, and them doing online education at home is your idea of homeschooling, you've only barely tasted a slight version of homeschooling. You've tasted 2% of the homeschooling bucket of 100%. If that makes any sense. I'm saying so many people today are having this online education experience, and I'm looking at it like, oh, honey, but if you only knew, that's not homeschooling. That is not the best, the brightest, the richest that homeschooling can offer. So I want to make that perfectly clear. If you or your loved ones are for the very first time experiencing what you think is homeschooling during quarantine and COVID 2020, which is what I'm calling COVID-19, it would have been worked better if you asked me if they'd named it COVID-20 instead of COVID-19, because then we could have called it COVID-20 2020. But I digress. What you're experiencing right now and thinking is homeschooling is not. It's just not. It's a gray, bland, tasteless, not I'm not going to say it's not real, but a bland, tasteless version, tiny 2% version of what homeschooling is or can be. Now, I'm not going to say online education isn't part of homeschooling. That would be hypocritical, because part of my high school education was doing online school. I went to an amazing online school called Williamsburg Academy. Look them up if you're interested. I highly, highly recommend them. Williamsburg Academy was instrumental in my high school education for a few years, and I absolutely loved my experience there with online school. So I'm not discounting online school as part of homeschool. It is part of it, but where you get your online education it dramatically varies. There are going to be some online education that is just a crap hole with long or short lectures and no richness to it, no rich diversity of mentors and accountability partners. And it's to compare, I'm trying to think of a real world comparison, but it's basically like calling, I don't know. It's calling a Wendy's Frosty, getting a Wendy's Frosty through the drive-through, and yes, you're getting ice cream, versus going to a decadent, gourmet, delicious, amazing ice cream place where they hand make it in front of you and add amazing toppings and addings into it. It's just different. Both are ice cream, but they're entirely different experiences and tastes and adventures. Yes, they're both ice cream. Okay, so even among the online aspect, there's a huge difference there. That being said, my homeschool education was different. Almost every semester was different for me. I did online school. I had many different tutors. I had tutors for music, tutors for math, tutors for history, tutors for various things, but not through my entire life. At other times, I attended private school for specific classes that maybe I couldn't get the same experience, versus if you wanted to like do mock trial or a debate, you would need to be part of a homeschool group or maybe part of a public school or private school for those specific classes. So we did a diversity and a gamut every year. Every semester it felt like was different and had a different flavor to it. So I felt like I got an incredible experience. Not only that, but because of that diversity, I was able to graduate early at 16. I was able to start college classes. I was able to experiment and had a lot of fun going to a local trade school college nearby to try some things because I was so young in technically high school age. From 16 to 18, I could take classes for free. So at this local school, I experimented and did welding, and I did culinary arts, and I took accounting. I did all kinds of interesting things to widen my life experience and kind of dabble in areas I never would have dabbled in before. So I love the homeschooling experience. It also allowed me to do full-time internships for 60 hours a week at our Utah State Capitol. That never would have happened if I'd been full-time in a public or private school. I would have had truancy letters out the ears. So I personally am a huge advocate for homeschooling. That being said, a Harvard professor is vehemently against it. And I want to go over some of this professor's reasons. So let's see. Oh, also another thing too that I want to point out is when it comes to homeschooling, not only will you, I feel like, get a superior, more diverse, or have the possibility of a superior, more diverse experience in the homeschooling realm. You're going to be able to do those full-time 60-hour internships as a teenager that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. But you're also going to get the life experience and have more time and more time with your parents to learn life skills. Now, one thing that I think is just kind of ironic is not too long ago, actually I don't remember exactly when, but on the late night show, there was a trending hashtag there should be a law, I believe was the hashtag. And one of the things that someone wrote on there that I believe was submitted to the show was, high school students should know basic life skills before leaving school. And they said, they quoted like changing a tire and running a household and doing taxes, those kind of things. And I remember looking at that the first time I saw that, and I thought, yeah, I agree. In one sense, they're absolutely right. You should know basic life skills before you leave high school age, and you should have that vital part of your education filled. But the thing is taking home ec classes is not going to really be sufficient. If you ask me, you should be learning these skills, and they're best taught at home, and they're best taught by the main person who is your care provider. That is your parents, people who are going to care about you the very most, to teach you how to properly do your taxes and how to run a household and how to change a tire. And no, our education system today is failing students. If we look at the broad scale of everything they need to know to survive and be a healthy, well-rounded adult, I believe that they're significantly lacking in life skills. And they put such an emphasis on another area, their more academic area, but quite frankly, they're failing in that area too in many cases. If you just look at it over and over, even when it comes to SAT scores or entrances into colleges across our country, you're finding over and over that even where supposedly our public school education is supposed to be superior in their academic knowledge and their academic teaching skills, but for some reason our homeschooling students who don't rigorously test all the time and they're not constantly testing, they're more learning. And yes, they do have to learn up on their, or brush up on their testing skills, but then when they do, they generally perform better. They're over and over performing better when it comes to college entrances and the exams, okay? So I'm sorry, but you're not going to convince me that homeschooling is going to give you a less than sufficient education. I think it's going to be more than sufficient, not just in the educational academic area, but in the educational life skills area. So that's my defense of homeschooling. Another thing is a lot of people are going to take a huge offense at this, okay? But the truth is, many parents today, whether they admit it to themselves or not, they don't really want to raise their children. They don't want to raise them 0 to 18 every day, all day. They don't want to be fully responsible for that. They want to live a piece of their own life and have the government take care of a portion of their child's life. I'm not saying they don't want to raise their children altogether, and I'm sorry if this is offensive to you. I know that these are harsh words, but I believe that this is the God's honest truth. I believe that it has become culturally acceptable on an underlying level to believe that it's the government's job to take care of your children to a certain extent, to provide a well-rounded education to your children to a certain extent. Well, we know that, I would say it's pretty self-evident, the public education system in our government is not giving our children a well-rounded education, that they are struggling immensely with bullying and a lot of other issues. But on top of that, I think that the harsh words need to be said that parents, it is 100% your responsibility to raise your child in every way, in their spiritual growth and development, in their emotional development and growth, in their academic growth and development. And no, you don't get to offload one of those to the government and say the government failed my child, because at the end of the day, yeah, the school system failed, but you failed your child by trusting the school system to provide for those needs. I know that is a harsh thing to say. I know I'm going to get some hateful backlash for saying that. But parents, it is not the government's job to provide for your children, to provide that part of their life. It is not their responsibility. If they're failing, it is your failure. Truly, you are responsible. You are their parent. You are the individual God has entrusted their life to, not the federal government. Okay? And I know that that's harsh, but I'm going to say it. It is your responsibility to raise your children, so raise them. And I'm not saying you can't take advantage of the public school system and use it for sports or use it for music or use it for something. I'm not saying that you can't be strategic and maybe send them to a very, very good school and then be very involved in what they're doing at that very good school. I'm not saying you're a bad parent if you send your child to a public education institution. What I am saying is that if you put them in the public education system and then leave them there and trust the system to do your child right, and you're not heavily involved, you're relying on the government to fill that part of your child's life for a significant amount of their life and time every single day, and you just throw that at your child and throw that at the government and the school system to take care of that, then yeah, I think you're being a lazy parent. I don't think that you are parenting your child the way that you should. Okay? Just to clarify, I'm not saying you're a horrible parent if you put your child in public education. There are many parents who put their child in public education and take a very active role in their life and actively are there through their child's education, and they do a good job. Okay? Just because I know I'm going to get, and even with me saying that, I know I'm going to get some hateful mom who's going to be like, I'm still a great parent. My child's an honor student, blah, blah, blah. I also want to just put this out there. Grades aren't everything. I know I'm going to get hate for that one too, but you can be a straight A student and still read 0 of the books. Okay. I legit have a really good friend who I think she's in her early 40s and has like 5 kids. And she was telling me, yeah, Lisa, I feel embarrassed and ashamed now, but I was a straight A student in high school and I never read any of the required readings. So don't tell me your kid's a straight A student and therefore you must be doing something right. No, what's your child actually learning? Being a straight A student doesn't mean they're actually learning and they are getting a straight A education, that they're getting a quality prime education. It just means that they learn how to hack the system. Okay. So I digress. I do also want to mention different people homeschool for different reasons. For instance, just taking my mother-in-law homeschooling her children versus my mother homeschooling her children. I haven't asked my mom actually this question straight up, but I do have vague recollections of people asking her when I was growing up, why did you choose to homeschool your children? My mother's education choices for us had a lot to do with the fact that she didn't want us learning a lot of the corrupt non-biblical information that was being taught in public schools, and it has gotten way worse now with the infiltration of teaching homosexual lifestyles to young children. The sex education is horrible, beyond horrible. I'll have to do a whole podcast just on the sex education in schools. Then she also had a huge problem with just children not having a significant moral guidance in their life for that many hours a day. And she wanted to know that when her children were learning history, they were learning real history, not the watered down or leftist version of history, which is also, again, even today, a huge problem. Then also today, you add on top of that, I'm sure my mom would have put that in there, and she would, because I do have younger siblings. She doesn't want them exposed to the transgender crap. She doesn't want her daughter going to the bathroom and finding a boy in there or vice versa. She doesn't need that. I don't think any parent needs that. She doesn't need the truancy laws because she decides to allow her daughter to do a 60-hour internship at the Utah State Capitol and learn in ways and a capacity that the public school could never come close to, but truancy letters because the government thinks that they own your children and they can determine what is best and not best for your child. No, that's the parent's job. Now, my mother-in-law, on the other hand, she chose to homeschool and is very vocal about this, and I think it makes parents very uncomfortable, but she says it she says it like it is, and it makes me kind of chuckle at her boldness, but I love it at the same time. When people ask her, why did you choose to homeschool your two boys, she will outright say, and it makes people, again, very uncomfortable, she will outright say to anyone who asked her that she wanted to be, I'm going to try and say it the best way I can remember her saying it, she wanted to be the biggest influence in her boys' lives than anyone else. And I think that makes people uncomfortable because they know when she says that, when you're sending your child to public school, you are potentially, very often, very likely, allowing someone else to be the biggest influence in your child's life. You're talking about waking hours between, depending on their age and how much after school activities and sports and whatnot they have going on, between 5 and 9 hours a day of your child being influenced by someone else, other teachers, a system, government system, not mom and dad. And she makes people uncomfortable, and it makes me laugh because it's for real when she says, and she doesn't rail against people, she doesn't rail against the system. She just says it like it is. She says, I want to be the biggest influence on my son's lives, not someone else. And she did that. She was the biggest influence, her and her husband, my father-in-law, biggest influence on their sons. And they achieved exactly what they went after. Good for them. And they clearly did a great job because my husband is freaking amazing. So now the Harvard, there came out for the May-June episode, or May-June, I don't know what to call it, whatever, article for Harvard magazine. They came out with an article saying that homeschooling should be banned. And the thing is the reasons that she puts in there, this Harvard professor, her name is Elizabeth Barthold, I think is how you say it. I think it's French. So I probably have to say it with an accent to say it right. But Elizabeth Barthold, she's a professor at Harvard Law. And she thought that now, especially with everything going on in the world, is a perfect time to let us know how she really feels about homeschooling. And she entitled the article, The Risks of Homeschooling. She suggests that home education should be banned altogether. And she attacked basically every American homeschooler, asserting that parents shouldn't be able to educate their own children because, first of all, she doesn't know what their academics are. She even went so far, as to say people could be teaching their children and they don't have degrees, and like maybe even they don't know how to read. And she used Tara Westover, who wrote the book Educated, which I've talked about on this podcast in our book section in a previous episode. I'm 99% sure I've talked about that book. It was truly good. Tara Westover wrote Educated, and she wrote about her slightly cultish fundamental upbringing in Idaho, which, and if you can go back and listen to that episode, I did a review on that book. I thought it was a very good book. I do believe that Tara's experience in basically only being taught how to read and the rest of it, she never went to school and she never really was formally taught anything. I do think she's an outlier. Yes, here's the thing. Yes, there will always be a chance or a possibility when you allow parents to homeschool, home educate their children, there is a possibility that they will not get a full education. That is a reality. But what it comes down to is the freedom principle. Who fundamentally is responsible for each and every child? The parents, not the government. Who is responsible for their education and their upbringing in every way? Who has been entrusted with them? And by God, I would say God entrusted those parents to look after their children, not the state, not the government. It is not the government's responsibility. So yes, there is a risk. But guess what? I would also argue there's a huge risk that we're going to get kids completely going through our public education system and being failed by it. And I think that we have that on a broad scale. And I would say that the evidence right now is showing that there's more an abuse of our public education system than there is our homeschool education system. Because homeschooling is not a walk in the park. It's hard. And it is a huge sacrifice on parents, and they're usually not signing up for it willy-nilly. They're usually putting their heart into it. She goes on to make wildly unfounded accusations about homeschooling families, linking the choice to educate at home as being white supremacist, being being in denial about science, and being an advocator of patriarchal values. It's clear that she's not interested in actually having rational debate, but mostly she's just letting her own bias color this conversation hardcore. But again, it comes down to, it doesn't matter if a child is going to be taught principles that the parents believe in, whether they're homeschooled or not. Let's just say someone is a white supremacist, which I think is icky and gross. Being homeschooled or being public schooled is not going to lessen the parents teaching their children that. And again, it comes down to, why do people homeschool? It's because I would say, in my experience, America was founded on principles of personal and individual freedoms, and that the government has to respect our right to make those decisions, because that right is our right. It's not that the government gave those rights to us. They were our rights, and we cannot surrender them to our federal government. Our freedom extends in every way, from freedom of speech or freedom to keep and bear arms, to freedom to marry whom we choose, and also freedom to raise our children and educate our children how we see fit. Now, again, I would argue that traditional school has failed us for years. Barthel makes an argument that keeping children at home creates the perfect space for child abuse, saying that teachers in traditional school settings are mandated reporters obligated to notify authorities of suspected abuse, neglect, I literally just watched a documentary series on Netflix about how the school system and how DCFS and our child abuse system is very, very, very flawed. And how it's not super great at protecting children. But outside of that, if teachers were capable or are capable of noticing every sign of abuse, then wouldn't bullying be non-existent, if supposedly teachers in public school is so grand and so great at protecting children and keeping them protected from abuse? That's not the case. We know that bullying is a huge problem in our school system. So clearly, that's not a very valid argument. Not to mention, that assertion of the professor seems to completely dismiss the reality that sometimes the child predator is working at the school, and we can have predators, just as likely to have predators at school working in a school system than it would be to have the parents. Abuse is there. We have to look around for it no matter where it's at in our society. Another thing is, I personally, I think that the quality of education for homeschooling and private schooling and diversifying the way that I was raised and my husband was raised, I think it raises for a more quality environment, both for students and teachers. Usually class sizes are different when you're going through, co-ops. There's more one-on-one from teachers to students. Barthel's other argument is that homeschooling strips children of their right to a meaningful education, which is really kind of empty. If you look at it, like I said, homeschoolers are shown over and over to outperform their public and private school peers in nearly every subject and standardized test, and their achievements definitely don't even begin to end there. They're more likely to start college earlier with more college credits. They're likelier to have higher rates of graduation. And outside of that too, studies have actually shown that homeschoolers are more likely to be emotionally, socially, and intellectually advanced than kids in traditional school settings. So I'm just saying, overall, the test and the evidence that we do have available is showing that homeschoolers are coming out with a better end of the stick right now. Now, I would say, and I would honestly be bold enough to just say it outright, I think that homeschooling makes for free thinkers who learn how to think instead of what to think. We are not coming out on a conveyor belt system made for a certain shape. We are free to learn in different learning styles. And I think that we have more opportunities in the long run than our public school peers. And I know it's going to offend a lot of people, but parent, honestly, if you're listening now and this is your wake up call, please consider homeschooling. And it's not what you're experiencing now with your teachers trying to figure out this whole online school. A rich homeschooling life is so attainable no matter where you live in the United States. Not only that, but it's become more and more normalized. I remember when I was growing up, oh my gosh, the criticism was insane. And then the number one question, of course, which every homeschooler of my age or older will roll their eyes and agree with me when we say the number one question we got was, how do you get your social life? What about their social life? How will they be socialized? Oh my goodness, I hate that question. Let me just be honest with you. Homeschoolers are getting a better social education and a better social life than any of your public schoolers. Very simple fact, because public schoolers are almost exclusively or primarily socializing with their peers. And that's all they learn is peer interaction and maybe their teachers. Whereas homeschoolers get a broad, rich, and diverse social life. So if you were wondering, the answer to that question is, what about our social life? Trust me, it's not suffering. It's doing much better than your average student in a public school, because we're being socialized with the young and with the elderly and with children. And we're learning childcare and basic home economics. And we're learning to do our taxes, and we're learning to change tires, and we're also learning algebra, and we're also learning all the science that we could ever want, and then some. And we're learning history in its true form in a way that lights us on fire and helps us remember it. We didn't just memorize it for a test and then forget it as soon as the test was over. So yes, our social life isn't suffering. And if you too are inspired to begin socializing your children, not just with their peers, but with the whole gamut of the human population, homeschooling is a phenomenal choice for you. All right. Then also, I just want to throw out there, if this professor, this Harvard professor, if she would really like to continue dying on her hill that homeschooling should be banned altogether and that homeschooling education is subpar, well, and she wants to tell us it doesn't benefit society at all, she's going to have to blatantly ignore the many, many examples of history, shining bright stars of students who were homeschooled in history. Among those, C.S. Lewis, Agatha Christie, Thomas Edison, Florence Nightingale, Mozart, Leonardo da Vinci, Louisa May Alcott, a personal favorite of mine, and so many more who have been homeschooled. Now you tell me, if they hadn't been homeschooled, if their love of learning had been squelched when they were children, if they'd been forced to study in 45-minute to 1 hour increments on one study, and then as soon as they'd barely begun to get into the meat of the subject and become passionate about the subject, been ripped away because the bell rang and, oh, it's time to move on to math now. No, I don't think they would be the brilliant stars they are today had they not had the opportunity, the golden, phenomenal opportunity of being homeschooled. And also, I just want to say, for those of y'all who want to give me excuses about why you can't do it, honey, my mom was a single mom for a long time. She didn't remarry till I was 8 years old. And you know what? Even when she was married, she was a fifth wife of a polygamist in the third world country of Mexico. Okay? So if my mother can figure out how to be a homeschool mom, even with small children, as a single mother, did I mention that? I think you probably can too. That's all. All right, now I have basically run out of time, so I will make this next part very quick, but please don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, send me a hate email if you hate what I'm talking about or how I deliver my message. Email is best, conservativebabes@gmail.com. If you would like to leave me a review, please let it only be a 5-star review, because those are the only kind I love. Just kidding. You can leave whatever review inspires you, but a 5-star would be greatly appreciated, especially on iTunes. On YouTube, if you're on YouTube, please not just subscribe, but hit the little bell that tells you when the next video comes out. Nowadays, subscriptions are a dime a dozen, and that's not really going to do much for this channel. If you want to actually see my content, you need to hit the notify button. All right, now this week's book is The Unexpected Spy, From CIA to FBI, My Secret Life Taking Down Some of the World's Most Notorious Terrorists by Tracy Walder. Phenomenal book. Just barely read this. I'm also, just from last week update, I'm still only halfway through Gone with the Wind. It's such a long book, but it's so good. But The Unexpected Spy, truly good. You can tell she's definitely the author. She is definitely left leaning. She makes no bones about that. She's more liberal leaning. I appreciated her candidness and just talking about that openly. But even that aside, I thought it was a very, very well written book. It definitely gave me some insight into the CAAI and the FBI, especially from a woman's perspective. I thought there was something to learn there. Whether you agree with her on everything is another story, but it definitely was interesting, especially from the 9/11 perspective and seeing that coming and then that just exploding in our nation's face, quite almost literally. Um, but it was really a very good read. One of those reads where I didn't want to put it down. I was very, very interested. So definitely recommend reading that one if you're into that kind of genre. Very, very good. All right, now, good in the world. Something that makes me happy is this is becoming a growing trend, especially in more conservative states, and I'm excited to see it spread, is this week the Idaho Senate passed a bill banning abortions. Now, you're asking, Elisa, how does this work? How can you just ban it? Well, they actually did it. They set it up in such a way, and it still needs to pass, obviously, the House and then go through the governor. Um, but the Senate has passed it so far. And Idaho being the state that it is, I think it'll probably pass. But the truth is right now, abortions are not going to become immediately illegal. I'm going to say once because I believe this will happen. Once the Supreme Court overturns Roe versus Wade, the power to protect unborn babies or keep abortions legal will actually just return to the states. So right now, what states are doing is they're preemptively going through and saying, okay, the second Roe versus Wade is overturned, then it's going to be illegal in our state, which is amazing. That means you're not even waiting for that later down the road. They're preparing for it now. They're preparing in faith that Roe versus Wade will be overturned and that their state will have acted already and said, okay, the second that's overturned, it's illegal in our state. Now, the only thing I don't like about this particular bill that they're passing, it does make exemptions for rape, incest, and risk to the mother's life. I've done many episodes. I can do more in the future. Mother's life, there's never an abortion that saves a mother's life. There's a difference between a procedure to save a mother's life, and unfortunately the baby doesn't survive it, versus an abortion, which is the intentional, exclusive going in to kill the child. That is different, and I've explained that more in depth in other episodes. You can definitely go check that out, or check out my Instagram stories. I have it saved under pro-life. You can read those articles. Again, for rape or incest, I don't believe there's ever a case where it is okay to kill a child in the case of rape or incest. So again, I've done other podcasts and stories on that. You're welcome to check them out. But I would, outside of those caveats, which I don't like, I like that our states are moving in this direction. Idaho is not the first to approach this. In 2019, Tennessee, Arkansas, Kentucky, and Missouri passed laws to ban abortions once Roe versus Wade is overturned. And some states coming up in the 2020 area, I'm trying to see which states those were. I just remember Utah was one of them. They're considering laws very similar. So I hope to see this growing trend. I hope to see more and more states acting preemptively and going in and trying to limit or get rid of abortion altogether as soon as we can overturn Roe versus Wade, which I do think will happen in our lifetime. This has been a wonderful episode with you. Please let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. God bless you. God bless America. This is Deconstructing the Culture. I am your host, Elisa Steele. Hey there. Thanks for watching this episode. I really appreciate it. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe. If you're on iTunes, go ahead and subscribe, and then go ahead and cross-pollinate over there. If you're usually a YouTube watcher, head over to iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, wherever you listen, and subscribe on there as well. It really helps with the numbers, and it helps with the ranking. If you could leave a 5-star review on iTunes, it'd be much appreciated. God bless you. Thank you.